Welcome to Civil Central.
I had a request from a commenter in one of my videos asking me to cover the Iran war with the USA and Israel, specifically about it being a forever war. So I figured I was going to cover the war eventually anyway, so why not do it now? The goal of this video is to lay out some simple information on the state of the war and answer if it is in fact a forever war. First, let's define a forever war, because if you guessed it's a war that lasts forever, you would be right. That being said, no war in human history has lasted forever, so how can you call anything a forever war? The terms forever war, perpetual war, and endless war all basically get defined as a quote, lasting state of armed conflict without clear conditions for victory or a defined conclusion. So that definition helps a little bit, but it's still vague and could be applied to so many different conflicts in human history. The key word being forever would indicate that we are looking at the length of a war to determine if it's a forever war. Examples you could point to would be the War on Terror, Israel and Palestine, the Korean War, the Cold War, and I would argue the Ukraine War. The longest wars in history would also likely fall into forever wars, such as the Roman-Persian Wars, which went for about 700 years, the 100 Years' War, which lasted about 116 years actually. Then lastly, there's the Reconquista, which actually had about 780 years of intermittent warfare. For comparison, the War on Terror, which is like the poster child of what we call forever wars, lasted from 2001 after 9/11 to 2021, which is when Joe Biden pulled everyone out of Afghanistan and there was a bit of a controversy about leaving equipment behind. For being the most popular war to call a forever war, it was only 20 years instead of something like 780 years. But the length of the war is not the only factor, as the vague definition tells us. It mostly is defined by the lack of goal in the war, or there not being a clear victory/end in sight for the average person. That would suggest it's somewhat subjective what a forever war is based on the information and worldview someone has. So let's bring this back to the Iran war right now. How long has this war been going on? It started on February 28th, 2026, and as of writing this script, it's been in a state of ceasefire 40 days later on April 8th, 2026. However, this ceasefire is constantly getting tested, with Iran randomly attacking transport ships.
You gave me clearance to go. You are fighting now. Let me turn back.
Trying to lay mines in secret.
It's May 26, 2026, and Iran just got caught doing something that should end any fantasy that there's any stability in this regime. Iran's IRGC Navy was running PACAP-class fast attack boats in the Strait of Hormuz, or even hovercraft, under the cover of darkness to lay sea mines just yesterday. Not metaphorical mines, not just Iran thinking they want to lay mines, actual contact mines in the world's most important oil checkpoint during a ceasefire. Are we really surprised?
And constantly delaying peace talks. The US, on the other hand, has the Strait of Hormuz blockaded, is militarily and economically pressuring Iran to capitulate, and has occasionally destroyed some of their missile launch sites and mine-laying boats during this ceasefire. Both sides are very stubborn, and is turning this war that Trump expected to be quick and easy to being more of a slog. I'm honestly surprised Iran is willing to take all this and refuse to end it, but I'm guessing the people in charge of Iran basically see this as an existential crisis that they basically just have to fight no matter what. Well, let's back up a bit, because one of the traits of a forever war is to have a clear goal in mind. The goals that started this war was laid out pretty clearly from the start. Israel and the US planned to 1. Obliterate Iran's missile capabilities and production, 2. Annihilate their navy, 3. Prevent Iran from supporting terrorist groups. Lastly, 4. Iran basically can't be allowed to continue to try to build nuclear weapons, and they must give up their enriched uranium. Regime change, or the people rebelling against their government, seems like a bonus objective that isn't part of the main plan. In my opinion, a regime change or revolution is kind of the only way I would see Iran changing their ways. A goal of mine is to convince you to like and subscribe, because it does really help a ton being such a small channel, and I can keep making videos for everyone, so thank you. So all that being said, what's the progress of all these goals so far? Has Iran's missile capabilities and production been obliterated? For the most part, this has been successful, with 1/3 of it being outright destroyed, another third is damaged, destroyed, or buried. The last of what they have, they likely have stockpiled underground or is being moved around wherever they need it. I'll count this as ongoing going because it sounds like they have roughly maybe 50% of their missile and drone stockpile left. Has Iran's navy, quote-unquote, been annihilated? It's wording like this that makes it hard to define the goals of the war, but I'd say this goal has actually been met, with Iran really only having a handful of so-called fast boats they use for mines and boarding. However, they could and probably are using the ceasefire to repair and grow their naval strength. Does Iran still support and get support from terrorist groups? The short answer is yes, and the slightly longer answer is not as much. So I'm just going to count this as a work in progress goal. Does Iran have nuclear capabilities or given up the enriched uranium? They don't have nukes, but have not given up their buried stockpile of enriched uranium, and we don't have any public agreement that they're going to give up on trying to make nukes. Even if there was an agreement, though, I assume they would just lie and break the agreement and then continue anyway. So unfortunately, this is also not yet achieved. Lastly, as a bonus objective, has the US laid the groundwork for a regime change? With the removal of multiple high-profile military officers and government officials, it has greatly weakened the hold the Iranian government held over its people. You also have to remember, right before this war, Iran had publicly shot and executed anywhere from 7,000 to 40,000 of their own citizens who were protesting them, which I want to jump in and say is an example of a real dictatorship, and that the people crashing out about America being Germany 2.0 want to be victims so badly, but they don't want to leave and live somewhere like Iran, Cuba, North Korea, and so on. Anyway, all of those civilian deaths, along with the fact the protests were against the current government, means there is a strong desire for the Iranian people to remove anyone currently in power and replace them. So the desire and the motives are there. America and Israel have provided an opportunity whenever this war does finally end for the citizens to fight their weakened government. Or perhaps if there's no peace deal agreed on, we might see America be forced to empower the citizens to overthrow their government. But as it stands right now, this goal has not been met. All that being said, we basically have 1 out of 4 or 5 of the war goals achieved, with the others having some progress, but some progress isn't enough unless Iran comes to the table and makes a deal, which I don't really see happening, especially since their leadership and military is all shattered. It's become difficult for them to communicate with everyone. There's groups within Iran that never want to surrender, while others are trying to negotiate. We all know that Trump wanted this war to be quick with a timeline of 4 to 6 weeks, which if you consider the 40 days of fighting before the ceasefire, and this does end up leading to an agreement before breaking the ceasefire officially, then that timeline still holds up. However, if you're counting from February 28th to now, then it does not hold up. Trump very clearly does not want to stick around in Iran longer than whatever he thinks he needs to. He's openly mentioned how Cuba's next on the list to pull his attention.
We have Cuba on our mind. Very important. A lot of problem for a lot of years. There won't be escalation. I don't think there needs to be. Look, the place is falling apart. It's a mess. And they've sort of lost control. They've really lost control of Cuba.
What that means might not be a military operation, but if it is, I can only hope that it's something more like what happened to Maduro in Venezuela than what's going on with Iran. When it comes to the Middle East specifically, the American population is kind of just tired of dealing with all of the crazy stuff going on. Everyone would just love if the Middle East got along and didn't have all these problems that affect themselves and the rest of the world. Unfortunately, that's not the world we live in right now. So with all that yapping, is the Iran war a forever war? I would argue that if the ceasefire ends and we continue fighting for more than a couple weeks at most, then maybe you could call it a forever war. But if a deal is met during this ceasefire, then obviously it isn't a forever war. But what do you think? Am I wrong about this, or do you agree? Whatever your take on this matter is, just remember to keep it civil.